my name's Adele Hogan. I'm the co-chair of the New York chapter, and Joyce is the heart and soul of this. But we are absolutely thrilled today to have Fang sponsor two wonderful speakers on artificial intelligence. So I think this is all going to be very helpful in your career. And let's kick it off with the two speakers introducing themselves.
I'll start. I'm Susan Youngblood. I'm a chief people officer, and I spent my career leading large technology divisions of companies such as IBM, Bank of New York Mellon, and London Stock Exchange. And I recently helped grow and launch an AI software engineering company called Ascendion, where I was the chief people officer. I've had some interesting experiences that relate to the topic today, such as I've helped implement AI-driven robotic process automation for a 9,000 employee organization, and is also responsible for the very rapid upskilling of a bank's 13,000 person global tech organization. And I'm also an advisor to 2 generative AI companies.
Hello, everybody. My name is Bob Pravder. I've been a CFO for middle market companies for a very long time. Prior to that, I was in the corporate world working for Paramount Pictures, Dun & Bradstreet, and AC Nielsen. In more recent time, I've been very active in the angel investment network in Connecticut. And that put me in touch with many companies, young companies that were claiming and actively pursuing artificial intelligence as part of their business model. And there came a point where I really needed to understand it in order to be able to evaluate those companies as potential investments. And that brought me into a lot of research and learning about what this is all about and how to apply it. And that was the beginning of what would become a real interest and, something that I really want to learn as much as possible about and see how it applies in the business world. You want to go to the next slide?
I will take us through the agenda. And so that Bob and I are going to share the stage so that we don't have one person just talking the entire time, mix it up a little bit. We'll start out with talking about the landscape of AI in business today, then go over to innovations impacting financial management. Bob will give you a little primer on the difference between machine learning and generative AI. And then we'll talk a little bit about how people are using AI today. And then I'll go into a deep dive on AI's impact on jobs and labor cost. Bob will talk about considerations for companies investing in AI and some risks inherent in working with AI that we should all be aware of. And then I will finish off by talking about how to learn more about Gen AI and then also how to stay current, since this is such a hot topic and it's moving very quickly.
And as far as questions, please put them all in the chat box and we will read them. Adele and I will read them at the end of their presentation.
If you want to go to the next slide, Bob will go. Yeah.
Next slide. Okay, the first thing I want to bring out is what does the macro view of AI look like, and how does it really been applied in our day-to-day world across major industries? And one of the things we find is that AI systems find connections in the data and patterns that humans just simply don't. They can provide scalable solutions and address really complex decisions. So some of the applications that we've seen, and many of these are probably, very known to you, and, banking and finance, we saw, a lot of fraud avoidance, insurance processing claims. In healthcare, it's very effective for identifying abnormalities, drug discoveries. You can actually see images and where AI systems can identify, cancer cells and cancer within those images, very much the same way a doctor might, and perhaps even more accurate. Social media, targeted information and ad channeling, education, personalized learning. E-commerce touches on customer journeys, which is a new term in a sense that I haven't really been focused on, but the more I see customer journey as part of a business model, the more interesting it gets. And we'll touch on that a little bit later. Agriculture, the different attributes of soil, seeds, and atmosphere, and how software interacts with that information in order to improve crop yields. Mechanical, we've all seen robotics and self-driving cars. Entertainment, streaming and changing language in films has now become something that's not particularly difficult to do, and with AI, probably very simple to do. And then security and surveillance, recognizing abnormalities in our environment. So at a industry level, These are the kind of things that people are really have been doing for quite some time. And this is just a really small subset of what has really been going on out there in the market. You go next page. So now I'll take you into something that's more of a micro view, but I'm going to focus on the financial function and on financial management. And, when we talk about finance, we're always talking about improving productivities and identifying and gaining deeper insights. And certainly a lot of the tools that we're seeing and the technologies we're seeing today are really working towards those goals. But the pace at which we're seeing innovation in this marketplace is pretty astounding. And I sort of have a frontline view of that with some of the angel work that I've been doing in some of the companies that walk through our doors looking, to capitalize themselves and grow into bigger companies from that process. But a lot of those things are still, minimum viable products or MVPs, and they do create a lot of value, but they're not quite 100% there. They're not fully comprehensive. So, as you see what's happening in the marketplace, you'll see a lot of great stuff, but over the course of time, I'm sure it's going to become much stronger and better. But right now, some of these innovations that have caught my attention are as follows, and I'll take you through them, relatively quickly here. The ERP systems, I picked on NetSuite and Intuit, where, for those, and I'm sure SAP and many of the other systems are doing similar kind of things. But in NetSuite, they're basically automating repetitive tasks, making suggestions, detecting anomalies, and having and integrating conversational interaction, which I think is, interesting technologies. But I was really caught by Intuit. That really captured my attention, where they claim they're going from, becoming a tax and accounting platform where users do the work to a platform that does the work for them. And that's a real fundamental change in the products and services of that company. And that has very significant strategic implications for not just Intuit, but also for the industry in which they compete. As an investor and as an angel investor, I've seen real innovation on investor and founder tools, especially things like due diligence and deal room analytics, where you can take a dozen or 24 files of all different types, Excel, Word, PDF, doesn't matter. Drop them onto a platform, and that platform is going to analyze those files, provide you with summary, provide you with analytics, and identify anomalies in the data that simply should draw your attention in the form of a due diligence process. Particularly useful when you have groups like venture capitalists and even angels that have to do a lot of due diligence across a lot of companies. Takes time, so this is a major time-saving tool. Deal flow management, portfolio management, and market research, trend forecasting, all great tools when it comes to evaluation and communication for young companies. On the labor side, and Susan's going to go way deeper into this, we're looking at a lot of tools that are dealing with productivity gains. We've all seen, what happens with chatbots on sales and customer service. We're seeing document creation getting a lot faster. We're seeing coding getting a lot faster as well with software that actually writes segments of code. On the labor side, we're also seeing innovations on hiring and on training. And on the legal side now, for many of you who have been CFOs and senior members of companies, trying to find contracts and find a clear repository of contracts and being able to take those contracts you get from third parties and identifying clauses that are missing or clauses that do not serve your interests, and being able to use the software to identify and call out those distinctions. The software also would extract and track commitments that appear in contracts. I don't know how many of you have tried to track down contracts in organizations, or had contracts that were written and executed without having a financial review, and having contracts written throughout the company for which there was no central repository for what commitments the company is making and what commitments it has to address as contracts come up for renewal. So a system that takes you through an end-to-end process on the legal side proved really, really interesting to me. I thought that was a great addition to the financial management function. Sales, anything that can shorten the customer journey from awareness to final purchase, using predictions for next steps and along those lines, anything that shortens that sales cycle from a finance or senior finance perspective is really valuable. So And now a lot of these different innovations are things that are happening not in the financial function, they're happening within the company, but they have profound effects on the financial results of the company and hence the financial function. From a marketing perspective, we're seeing it generate AI generating marketing campaigns, actually writing the campaigns, writing the create or addressing the creative and putting out the formatting. And then, of course, just to say that this is a first draft. Most people don't take what comes out of the AI and just drop it right in and go with it. I think, the idea that this creates a really good first draft for you, and then you have to go back and forth with the material and fine tune it and validate it is central, but it does save you an awful lot of time pulling this information together and putting it in different forms and formats for different audiences. In operations, supply chain optimization, forecasting, inventory management, and then just a small one at the end is something that I found really useful is just tools that allow you to translate languages. So you can have people on the phone with different languages and be translating them, receive documents in one language translated pretty quickly into another language, or basically simple things like summarizing the meeting. And at the end of that summary or part of that summary, have task assignments for who is committed to doing what. So these are some of the tools. Just again, just a cross section. It's not a comprehensive list. But when I look at some of these tools, I see the benefits that we can have more, as I said, as a micro function within the financial management of the company. Okay, so let's go on to the next page. Now, before we go any further, I'd like to really just touch on a few basic concepts. Make sure that when we talk about AI, we're using sort of a common language or a common vocabulary. So when I think of AI, I think of it as really two components to it, or two different sections of AI. One is machine learning, and the other one is generative. And of course, we've heard an awful lot about generative AI and large language models. But machine learning is an awfully important part of the AI environment. And what machine learning is really doing is it's algorithms that are trained to make predictions or decisions based on input data, and they're addressing some sort of a predefined objective. Now, the key here is that it learns from data, and hence the word training in there. And it learns without being explicitly programmed. And that's what machine learning is all about. It's data that's extensible to create predictions, decisions, and other outcomes without having to be programmed. Now, the benefits of this is that we've seen it in our life, and we interact with companies more and more, that it's very responsive, it's very fast. You can make decisions, you can incorporate a lot of transactions at an industrial scale, and you think of the companies that do fraud detection in that regard as just one example. And it's really great for repetitive tasks. It really increases the efficiency of a business, that chooses this technology to address a repetitive task. Now, on the limitation side, there's a concept here. Basically, it revolves around transparency, or the ability to explain decisions and resolve problems that come about from the recommendations. So some machine learning systems are very transparent. You can understand not just the decision that it's recommending or the recommendation, but you can understand what variables led it to that recommendation. There's other AI systems that are less transparent, and they become very difficult to understand the relationship between the input data that's going into that system and the relation and the prediction or decision that's coming out of that system. Now, there's also a sort of an inverse relationship that in certain cases, the more predictive or accurate a system gets, the less transparent it gets. But I think there's also an awful lot of work in the field of AI among all the major players there to try to make predictive systems more transparent and explainable for many reasons, including having systems that meet regulatory requirements in certain markets, and having systems that enable you to have much more buy-in from the people who are using it. As financial people, I can't imagine that too many of us would take advice and recommendations from people without understanding what that recommendation is based on and the implications. Well, the same thing here. You really wouldn't take recommendations out of a black box if the implications were sufficiently serious. Now, there's also limitations in the form of data quality, which comes in the form of data bias or insufficient amounts of training data, which you might find in smaller companies that are just trying to get into this field. So that's a little bit of a background on what the machine learning side is. On the generative side, we've seen an awful lot of that lately. It complements human creativity by generalizing patterns from large data sets, and it produces novel content and content that is in fact different from the data that was creating that content. Now, when we talk about generative AI, we're talking about what they call 6 modalities at the present. What we've seen is text, imaging, video, coding of software, audio, and now 3D. And more recently, the technology has been evolving to the point where people are talking about multimodal. And basically that is combinations of the above, that creates different kinds of outputs. And, as you go through and look at what these kinds of systems do, there's really there really is a great benefit to getting your hands on the software and really working through the prompts and seeing what it gives you and beginning to experience this for yourself. Now, another point around generative AI is that it's becoming the new user interface. It's changing how we engage with content, with brands, with companies. Again, that's much broader than the financial perspective, but it does affect how financial people are going to do, as we talked about before, research and interacting with the information in our ERP systems and so forth. And, from a more competitive perspective, we look at the last 2 points, how AI is shrinking the amount of time it takes to go from an idea to the execution of that idea. And what's the implication of that? Well, it's certainly increasing the pressure on businesses because the marketplace is moving a lot faster, because these tools enable people to compete and to create alternatives to what you do much more easily at lower cost. You can copy ideas much faster. There's fewer moats that are protecting your business. And some of the reasons that's happening is because you really don't need certain types of expertise to execute as you did in the past. You don't need specific programming expertise. And because the data contains so much of the value in these systems and the power in these systems, you don't really need domain experts to the degree you used to before in order to create these systems. So they have lowered the cost, and they're increasing the pace at which innovation is occurring in many industries. And one of the takeaways from that is that we're seeing fewer moats. Well, what moats do we see left after this kind of evolution? Well, IP and data, defensible data, is really one of the remaining moats. And then distribution or distribution channels is another. So, basically, when I look at these 2 types of overall systems, what I'm really seeing is that AI is a tool and a technology that I think just about every company has to become engaged with at this point. It's become, very powerful. It has the real ability to change not just companies competitively, but the industries in which they serve. And, you really need to, as financial professionals, but as, CEOs and every executive, big businesses, as well as smaller ones, really need to understand how to leverage this technology and understand what it can do, from a product and from a productivity standpoint. So now I'm going to turn it back to Susan to really take you through some of the HR implications of artificial intelligence and how it's affecting the labor markets, both within your company and the broader environment.
Thanks, Bob. There has been a great deal of excitement and concern about what AI will do to our jobs. This introduction of generative AI is likened to the impact of the Industrial Revolution, and I'm not exaggerating. In addition, the media has been amplifying statements such as Elon Musk saying that AI will eventually replace all jobs, and a New York Times article that asserted that entry-level investment banking roles will all be replaced by AI tools. As a result of this, there's a lot of uneasiness about AI. And for additional context, according to Harvard Business Review research, it is believed that most business functions and more than 40% of all US work activity can be augmented, automated, or reinvented with generative AI. And the changes are supposed to have the largest impact on the legal, banking, insurance, and capital market sectors, and then followed by retail, travel, health, and energy. Looking back in history, while precise data about the Industrial Revolution is hard to come by, estimates show that while there were substantial losses due to the mechanization, there were also substantial job gains in industrial jobs. In the AI era, the World Economic Forum predicts that new technologies are going to disrupt 85 million jobs globally between 2020 and 2025, and we're getting close to 2025, but it's also creating 97 million new jobs. So when you think about these numbers, the human capital implications are tremendous. Joyce, if you'd go to the next slide, that would be helpful. From a financial planning perspective, the introduction of generative AI changes nearly every element of labor cost, the details of which I'm going to get into. So one of the most obvious places for investment is in training, because obviously you have to upskill the workforce to work effectively alongside AI. And again, if you go back to some of those numbers, what Harvard Business Review is saying in all this research, you're looking at the vast majority, if not all, of your population, which is, any of you who have done financial planning with training and development know that that is, it's not small. And then not only it's not a one and done, this AI is changing rapidly every single day, every single week. There's a new tool or innovation that's coming out. So it's going to require a commitment to ongoing learning. So companies are going to need to set aside long-term budget for continuous upskilling to keep the employees' skills aligned with AI advancements. Then job displacement costs. While AI is going to increase efficiency, there's going to be some short-term costs associated with the severance packages. And of course, everybody knows on this call, it depends on what country you're in, et cetera, as to what the cost will be. But the introduction of AI is also going to cause a redistribution of labor. It's not the same that we used to have. Generative AI, as I mentioned before, is creating new roles, such as AI specialists, prompt engineers, and data ethics officers. Recruiting for these positions can be expensive due to high demand. It's also possible you may not be able to find the skills you need for newly created jobs because they either don't exist in the market or the roles are so scarce that you just can't get them. There's not enough to go around. So you'll need to think about how do you reskill your current employees to fill some of these roles. Also, your geographic footprint may change. This might happen if you find that much of your call center and coding work is going to be automated and you have most of that work being done in low-cost countries. So overall, these combined changes may really affect payroll and benefit structures, office-based requirements, pretty much anything that has to deal with the change in your labor force needs to be factored into your financial plan. Another point I wanted to bring forward is change management. And some people think that this is a soft, fuzzy HR thing to do, but with the magnitude of what's happening here, it's not something you can just breeze by. There is a very real fear of AI taking people's jobs, including highly skilled white-collar positions. Some of you may have joined the session because you know this is a concern. This feeling can cause a number of outcomes, including causing employees to lack trust and to resist the change. If your employees are not bought in, this can significantly impact the ROI of your AI implementation. So with a change like this that may be quite disruptive to employees, investing in the change management to transition the workforce is absolutely critical. You have to take proactive steps to gain their buy-in and trust. If you do that, it'll help mitigate risks and reduce the potential for a failure of your AI implementation. And then ROI. This is, I think, a real positive thing. I mean, look, the ROI of a generative AI is an attention grabber. It is really stunning. To get that ROI, you have to make the investments that we talked about from a human capital perspective, change management, upscaling, all these things. But this can really cut costs and improve productivity. From another perspective that people don't always think about is using AI can actually also improve job satisfaction and retention. Think about some of the things that AI may take away from your job that you really don't like, maybe travel expense reporting, or maybe some of those things that take you a lot of time, which are probably not worth the effort that you're putting in. It'll automate some of these repetitive things that you don't like to do. This is going to hopefully improve your job satisfaction and allow you to work on higher value work, which gives you greater output and hopefully better innovation. So when you really think about the big picture of this, there is a substantial positive impact beyond just the ROI coming from the productivity change. Okay, I'm done with my chart. Bob, you're next.
Next one. So before, when I took you through some of those functional tools that we were talking about and some of the applications, those are things you can bring into your company, most of them from the outside. Now, and apply technologies from the outside that have pretty well been developed in order to fulfill those type of benefits. Now, I want to switch gears now and consider what it looks like for investment in your company, investing in its own AI tools and its own customized applications. So first, I'm going to just provide something of an overview. Then I'm going to go a little bit deeper in. So basically, AI has different applications for which it's extremely effective. There are other applications for which you might say it's extremely ineffective. So on the effective side, what we've found is that combinations of different types of data and technology in order to create a new combination, something that they refer to as a recombination, is really something that AI is extremely effective. It really does take data. It can take a variety of different types of data, and it can recombine that data to create new combinations and create new value. Drug discovery is a really good example of that. On the ineffective side, AI hasn't particularly been effective at this point, where you're actually coming up with radical new ideas or first instances of a new product. Reason being is that the training data and the data that informs the AI applications, may not really have the information about what kind of radical new ideas, especially if you're taking data that comes from, sources like within your company. It tends to do extremely well using data that exists and recombining that information as opposed to producing something that's entirely new. Now, we're not talking about generative here. We're talking about, AI that's really more for machine learning applications. And then when you look at how AI is applied in order to create the greatest productivity gains within companies, there's a few different attributes of companies and approaches that they take that seem to correlate highest with companies that have the greatest productivity gains. Some of those include, process improvement orientation. That's a cultural attitude within the company that they actually value and invest into process improvements. Decentralizing the innovation teams as opposed to keeping them in a central location within the company is also correlated with really better outcomes and productivity gains. And then having diversity on the innovation team in terms of the compositions and skill sets of that team and the location of that team. So if you look at those three, a process improvement culture, a decentralized innovation team, and a diversity of your team composition and skill sets, those are some of the core elements that will correlate or produce the best outcomes in terms of productivity gains and benefits from investments in AI. And also, when you're looking at processes, it's really helpful to consider it as an end-to-end process rather than lifting small portions of the process and trying to, automate or improve on just the small portion. Now, it's also, every company is different. So these are more like general directional insights that come from the experience of companies that have done this in the past. As technologies change, as each company is a little different, obviously, you might find a different combination within your company that works best for you. Now, if you go on to the next page, we're going to take it a step further now and looking at how companies have invested in AI and what kind of steps or structures they take in order to do this. First is, there's really a few steps that go into it as you conceptualize what's required for you to actually do an AI implementation within your organization. Setting up a brain trust, classifying projects into short and long-term initiatives, establishing a portfolio of projects, figuring out how the AI team will fit into the org chart, and then setting up a risk management or an audit process. So in terms of setting up a brain trust, that's what I'm talking about there is a combination of insiders and outsiders, and also representing different functional areas within the company. insiders, because obviously, you have the product, customer, industry knowledge, and outsiders, because it just may be you don't have that skill set within the company that you need in order to be able to implement, the latest technologies in AI that might be most appropriate for your application. Now, the brain trust would look throughout the corporation and then identify data assets and a set of activities that are appropriate for automating with machine learning and generative AI. And that's an important first step, just understanding what data assets you have available that lends itself to these applications, and what activities you can automate with this that are, that really also lend themselves to these types of tools. Once you have that kind of information coming in, then you would then classify those projects into both short and long term. Now, obviously, you want to understand what your target is before you try to understand what technology and applications that you need. So starting with the why in terms of what are you solving for, or what are your customer needs, and then once you've gone through and understand what your objectives are, then being able to fit the technology, the how, to solve for that problem would become a subsequent step. Now, in terms of organizing into short and long-term initiatives, clearly short-term initiatives always feature quick returns, low-hanging fruit, not particularly difficult to implement. On the other side, you have long-term initiatives, and those initiatives are the kind of things that can change an entire company. The example I gave you before about Intuit's automation of their accounting and tax preparation process is one of those examples of something that not only can change the company itself, but it can change the industry, the competitive environment. It's a highly strategic change, and that's the kind of thing we're talking about when we're talking about long-term initiatives, as opposed to short-term, which would be more productivity oriented. And then as you're looking at the initiatives and trying to decide which ones look good, as I don't have to tell this audience that keeping the ROI in sight is really part of this. You can certainly get initiatives that don't have the kind of impact on the organization that would provide both the financial benefits or the strategic returns or benefits that you're looking for. So once you've gone through and sort of classified your applications or initiatives into short and long term, and you prioritize those, you establish a portfolio, and choosing maybe 4 to 5 short-term projects seeded throughout the organization, one long-term project. And again, that long-term project has very significant competitive implications, but it's also much longer term, harder to implement. It's really a game-changing kind of initiative is what you're looking for. And then finally, once you have your portfolio, the next step would be really to figure out how the AI team will fit into the organizational chart. Now, we can think in terms of centers of excellence, where it's a sort of a centralized department, or you can think in terms of diverse or distributed throughout the organization. And what we're seeing is that companies that combine those, I think we've talked previously about distributed analytics, data analytics people, distributed or decentralized in the company, because they're closer to the decision makers, they have better insights into the business units and the functions, they understand what's required for adoption. So having that decentralized skill set back into the organization is critical. But I don't want to take away from the fact that there is a role for a center of excellence, and the center of excellence would also provide broad organizational perspectives across divisions that might unearth different opportunities, or they have deeper knowledge of the technology or access to internal or external talent and skills that would be harder to find if in a decentralized function. So there is that balance between central and decentralized, but I think the direction that we're seeing is that decentralized is really critical. And of course, the centralized does add its value as well when it's in a center of excellence kind of a role. And then finally, setting up a risk management function or an audit process is extremely important. And if we go to the next page, I'll take you through a little bit about what I'm talking about there. Now, when working with AI, there is no shortage of risks and different type of risks in any new technology, but certainly in a technology this powerful and this pervasive that can affect both your company as well as society in general. So when you're looking at the kind of risks that need to be managed within an AI context, you're talking about bias in the data. And, biasing can have different outcomes. You allocate your resources inappropriately, or you misrepresent groups of citizens and other people in other situations. And examples of this would be, an Amazon recruiting system that they built, that would help them identify who the most likely candidates are for those people that they're recruiting to be successful within their organization. Well, they ended up scrapping that system. And the reason they did is because their training data, all the incoming data that they used to create that system, was predicated on a history, and a history that was predominantly male dominated. So what they found is that that system was biased against women, and therefore, they had to scrap it. You also see systems, or earlier on, where loan approvals or job applications were biased against or for particular race or minority groups. And in those particular cases, you actually see government regulation coming into effect because, they want to make sure that people who are, for example, not approved for a loan or denied a loan application, that there's a reasoning and it's explainable. Getting back to what we were talking about before, explainability and transparency, so that somebody who does get denied a loan approval could at least be informed what the reasoning is for that denial, and it doesn't come across as, something that is unexplainable or a black box kind of thing. And that's how they sort of addressed the particular risks inherent with biased data, especially within applications that have very significant societal implications. So that takes us to another one, lack of transparency or explainability, and we just talked about for the regulatory. But another side of that is buy-in. Again, as financial professionals, I don't think we like investing into black boxes or making big decisions for which we don't understand it. And there's just recently in the New York Times, I saw an article where the Nevada school system, this was just unbelievable to me, but the Nevada school system went out and they commissioned a third party to build an AI system that would help them identify students within the school system that were at risk. And as a result, which students would deserve extra assistance and financial support. And that system actually identified and dropped about 200,000 students from the at-risk population. And when the school administrators saw that, including students that were in fact homeless and, in low-income schools in particular, they went back and they said, well, tell us what this is based on. How did you actually make these decisions for these particular students? And the company that built it really couldn't do it. They both couldn't explain it and they wouldn't explain it because they thought it was proprietary. But the idea here is that because it appeared to that school district as a black box decision process, there was a lot of pushback and certainly not a lot of buy-in there. Going further, false conclusions, that could occur where you have lack of history. You don't have enough data history, and certainly, as we talked about with new product development. Another one would be overfitting. And the risk there is that you have a set of test data that you're using to train your AI models, and that test data is applied and analyzed to the point where it actually does a really good job on itself. But as soon as you apply real world data against those analytical models, it doesn't work very well. And that's because they basically overfitted the data. They took variables within that data set that really didn't apply to the problem at hand, and found correlations with those variables that affected the model. So overfitting is something, there's a balance there that one needs to be aware of. But then, if you actually have, issues around bias or transparency, the companies themselves run risks associated with reputational risk, associated with perceived bias and prejudice. Legal risk could be discrimination lawsuits, regulatory risk, as we talked about, and the cost of compliance for that. Other risks include privacy. You can combine data in various ways and end up with unintended side effects. One interesting example was Google Maps overlaid with Strava, which is an app that people use for tracking their biking and their running statistics and so forth. And by overlaying those two, they unintentionally identified military bases in Afghanistan. And that was not on anybody's radar, but that's the kind of issue that you can run into with, not being aware of what the privacy implications are of different technologies and applications. And we've all heard about hallucinations. And the lawyer, best example is a lawyer who went out and used a generative AI to write a brief, submitted it to the court, didn't verify it, and the citations within that brief were made up. And as a result, the reputational risk of that individual. But you can certainly have that in any venue. And the best defense against that is really validating the results you get, especially if you're doing things like text generation, where you really do have to go back and validate what you're getting. These systems are not at the point where you can take what the output from these systems at face value and assume that these systems have got it right. There's ways to go before we can get that comfortable. And then, of course, when you're dealing with generative AI, you also have a concept called prompt engineering. And the better you become at asking the system for what you want with more detail and more relevant examples and other things that you can include in those prompts, the more likely you're going to get something close to what you're looking for. And then finally, the last point has to deal with security. And that's being careful about the data that you upload to the cloud. If you're using sensitive corporate data, customer list, and whatever other things that might be considered highly proprietary to your company, uploading it to the cloud is a very risky thing because that data becomes training data within the AI system. And that could also come out in other venues and other formats. So the best defense against that, at least right now, is applying AI in more of a local AI environment so that you're not uploading sensitive data to a cloud environment.
Next slide. Bob, that was great and very in-depth. So let's switch gears and talk about how to learn more about AI and stay current. I have led several sessions like this one for executive search firms because what they've told me is one of the top concerns they hear from executives across organizations, across functions, is that they know they need to learn more about generative AI, but they don't really know where to go. As organizations shift toward AI-driven solutions, executives who understand AI will be seen as forward-thinking leaders who are ready to steer their companies through digital transformation. So learning more about AI is a great move. One of the best ways to learn about AI is to use the tools yourself. ChatGPT is one of the most commonly referred to tools, but there are many, many other generative AI tools that you can use as well, as you can see on the slide. Sometimes what I like to do is ask a question of ChatGPT and then ask, Copilot or Bard or something else the exact same question and see who gives me the better answer. They all do different, they all look at different things. So if you're just starting out, you can just open up ChatGPT or Gemini or Perplexity or whatever you want to use to help you write a LinkedIn post or give you suggestions on what to do for your family vacation. It does really well at that. If you're more familiar with it and you want to see what it can do for your function, many AI tools offer free or affordable pilots, which can help you see firsthand the ROI. Also, I would say that you should ask your CTO what they recommend, because I'm sure they've been looking at this for quite some time and may have opinions and, information, insight that you don't have access to. The whole point of, experimenting around with these tools yourself is it gives you firsthand learning. And as you do that, it helps you understand how to make better informed decisions on your AI investments. Next slide. So AI advancements are being made daily, and it can feel really difficult to keep up, especially since you have a job and it's, there's just too much information, but don't despair. Just depending on how you learn, I've listed a number of ways to stay connected, and these are all a minimum time investment, unless you go to a deep dive course in Coursera. That's your choice. But these are really meant to be, a way for you if you're on your commute or if you just want to read something, that's not going to, absorb you into an entire book. These are my suggestions. And you don't have to be technical to understand these. My favorite way to learn is through podcasts. A few of my favorites here are listed. The AI Daily Brief may sound technical when you start it, but as you listen to it over a couple of days, you'll get to understand the patterns, and all of a sudden it becomes completely understandable. The Wall Street Journal Tech News Briefing is a kind of an overview every day of what's going on in the tech world, but of course, AI is almost every day a component of that. So you learn about AI and the tech world if you listen to that, and it's very quick. Then I also put in some articles. You know, there's many articles about AI that are published on a daily basis. From a senior executive perspective, if you want to understand the big picture, I have found the articles from Harvard Business Review and the consulting firms to be helpful. The ones here are just a sample. I will say, if you're doing your own search for articles, I would encourage you to look at the dates on the articles that come up in your search, because even articles that are 6 months old can be out of date. I read something that popped up in a search and it was from the end of 2023, and it was like, oh, this is wrong, because things have changed so much since the end of the year. And then last, I put here some classes you can take. There's so many. If you want to go deep, you can go take courses at the university level. Bob's taken some pretty intense ones, I think, through Coursera, right, Bob?
Yeah, and Coursera is really an interesting place because they have a variety of courses that are AI for business people, as opposed to the technical AI, kind of courses. These are courses really oriented towards business people who need to understand AI at a much deeper level, but not going so far as to be extremely time consuming or, or almost unattainable. These courses are really balanced and didn't take an extreme amount of time, but they were very valuable. And courses from Wharton and almost every major university and a number of major companies that have contributed to that, both on the machine learning side and on the generative AI side. So if you have the time and the interest, I think those courses have been really good and not overly long or dense.
Yeah, and then there's LinkedIn Learning, there's YouTube. I mean, if you want, you will find. If you search, you will find. I guarantee it. And if you put in the right search parameters that you're looking at it, at a senior executive level, you'll generally come up with some really great stuff. So the learning opportunities are absolutely plentiful here. So with that, as our we've covered all our topics here. Happy to take questions. We'll turn it over to Adele and Joyce to share the questions that are in the chat, and Bob and I will do our absolute best to answer them.
Okay, let's start with the first one, which is New York City has it's called a bias audit law, where anything that's related to artificial intelligence, or it's defined so broadly, it's really any automated hiring system, an employer working in New York has to do this audit. Have you seen anything about this, or are you making any recommendations?
There's a ton of legislation out there that's trying to prevent bad stuff from happening with generative AI. I'm not familiar with that particular one that I can comment on it, but it just, I think, highlights the fact that from a oversight perspective, that we can't be too cautious in anything that we're doing where we're having machines making decisions. There always has to be a human looking at it and making sure that it makes sense and that there's oversight. And then we're not just accepting what an algorithm or some other thing that's kind of hidden behind a black box is presenting to us. There needs to be human intervention.
Right. And so for the people that work in the financial industry and then do models, it's the same thing when the regulators come in and say, you guys don't understand your models, and they fail you. You need to understand what's going on underneath. How about sometimes people talk about AI skills roadmaps or certifications. Like, what certifications would you recommend for people that are trying to enhance their careers?
I think it would really depend if you're in a technical role or in a non-technical role. And I am not in a position to actually recommend specific companies or their certifications. I think working with your HR team, looking at the roles you have in your company and mapping out what makes sense for the future is really critical. And it's difficult, by the way, in this time and age. You really don't know 100% what you're going to need tomorrow because the jobs keep being created. So working with your HR and the management team to really understand where you think you're going and what certifications would be important for what particular populations is how I would do it. I wouldn't necessarily just take something off the shelf because everybody's AI journey is different.